Hello, welcome back. Or welcome for the first time, if this is your first night here. Either way, I'm glad you're settling in. Tonight we're doing something I've wanted to do for a while. We're going back into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, specifically everything that happened after Avengers Endgame. And there is a lot of it. Films, shows, characters who've been building quietly in the background for years, threats that are still unresolved, heroes who are still figuring out what they're supposed to be doing now. It's a surprisingly rich amount of story, and I think it deserves a proper, unhurried look. Now, if you haven't seen everything, that's fine. That's sort of the point of tonight, really. We'll go through it all together, gently. And if you have seen everything, hopefully some of these details land differently when there's no pressure to keep up, no algorithm reminding you to keep watching, just a quiet voice talking through the things that happened and what they meant. So, let's start at the end, or rather, the morning after the end. Avengers Endgame finished with a few things that are worth sitting with before we move forward. Tony Stark died. He snapped his fingers, reversed Thanos' snap, brought back everyone who had been dusted, and the energy of the Infinity Stones killed him. He died in a field surrounded by his friends and his daughter, and he got a funeral on the lake at his farmhouse. And that was that. Iron Man, the character who started all of this in 2008, the one who made the whole enterprise feel possible in the first place, was gone. Steve Rogers didn't die. Steve Rogers did something arguably stranger. He went back in time to return the Infinity Stones to their proper moments, and then he just didn't come back. He used the remaining Pym particles to live out a full life in the past with Peggy Carter, the woman he'd lost 70 years earlier. And then he came forward as an old man and sat on a bench and handed the shield to Sam Wilson. That was his ending. Peaceful, personal, and quietly devastating if you think about it too long. This man, who had been a soldier his entire adult life, finally choosing not to be. Thor flew off with the Guardians of the Galaxy. Bruce Banner had a smashed arm and a philosophical acceptance about it. Clint Barton went home to his family. Natasha Romanoff was already dead. She'd sacrificed herself for the Soul Stone on Vormir, and that sacrifice couldn't be undone. Pepper Potts was raising a daughter named Morgan. And then there was the blip. 5 years of half the universe being erased, and then everyone coming back at once. That sounds like relief, and in some ways it was. But think about it from the other direction for a moment. You disappeared, and then you came back 5 years later to find that the world had moved on. Your apartment has different tenants. Your job has been filled. The people who loved you are 5 years older, and they went through grief you never experienced. Children grew up without you. Partners found new lives. And now you're back, standing in a world that had to learn to function without you. And everyone is glad to see you, and also quietly unsure of how to fit you back in. The blip, as it came to be called, is the psychological backdrop to almost everything that happens in Phase 4 and Phase 5. A world collectively processing loss, disruption, and a very strange kind of trauma, which is perhaps why the first major story the MCU told after Endgame was about grief. About what happens when you love someone so much that you literally reshape reality around the hole they left. Tonight we're going to cover all of it. WandaVision, The Falcon and The Winter Soldier, both seasons of Loki, Shang-Chi, Eternals, Spider-Man, No Way Home, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, Thor, Love and Thunder, Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania, Guardians of the Galaxy Vol. 3. The Marvels, Deadpool and Wolverine, Captain America, Brave New World, Thunderbolts, and the Fantastic Four. That's a lot of ground. We'll take it slow. There's no rush tonight. Each of these stories is worth looking at properly, not sprinted through for the sake of a catch-up reel. Some of them are quiet and character-driven, some are enormous and cosmic, some are both at the same time, which is a trick the MCU occasionally manages to pull off when it's at its best. And if you fall asleep halfway through something, that's fine. That's the idea. The stories will be here when you come back. They've been building for years already, A few more hours won't hurt, so pull your blanket up a bit, find a comfortable position, and let's start with a woman, a town in New Jersey, and a television set that keeps changing decade by decade as its creator tries to outrun a grief she doesn't know how to name. There's something worth adding about the shape of the MCU post-Endgame before we get into the individual stories. The Infinity Saga had a clear architecture, each film built toward a larger confrontation. The Infinity Stones were the MacGuffin threading through everything, and the destination, Thanos, the snap, the response, was eventually visible on the horizon years before it arrived. It felt in retrospect almost classically structured, a rising action spanning over a decade. Phase 4 and Phase 5 have a different feeling, more diffuse, more lateral, stories branching in multiple directions rather than converging toward one point, characters getting their own small films, and shows where the consequences stay local rather than cosmic. Grief being processed in separate rooms by separate people, a multiverse opening up rather than a single threat crystallizing. Some people found that frustrating. I think it was probably necessary. After Endgame, after an ending that large, you need to let the story breathe for a while before you build toward the next crisis. You need to establish who the new heroes are and what they believe before you put them in a situation that tests those beliefs. The post-Endgame MCU is doing that slowly, and the slowness is a feature rather than a flaw. Also worth saying, the Disney Plus shows changed the nature of what the MCU is. Before WandaVision, Marvel told its stories in films and television series. The shows created space for longer, slower character work, for 6 hours rather than 2, for quiet scenes that would have been cut from a feature, for arcs that develop across weeks rather than minutes. Not every show used that space equally well. But the best of them, WandaVision, Loki, The Falcon, and The Winter Soldier, made arguments that couldn't have been made in films about characters who needed more room than features allow. Westview, New Jersey, a perfectly ordinary American town. A bit of a grid layout, a main street, some houses with gardens, a town square. The kind of place you'd drive through and not think about twice, except that almost every single resident of Westview has had their free will removed. They've been cast in roles they didn't choose, in a reality that someone else is writing, and the person writing it is doing so from a place of such profound psychological pain that she doesn't even fully know she's doing it. That's where WandaVision begins, and it's a genuinely strange and interesting way to start a new chapter of the MCU. Juan du Maximoff lost Vision in Infinity War. She watched him die twice, actually. She destroyed the Mind Stone herself to prevent Thanos getting it, and then Thanos reversed time and took it anyway. And then Endgame happened, and the blip reversed, and everyone came back, except Vision. Vision stayed dead because he wasn't dusted. He was killed properly, before the snap. There was nothing to undo. What Wanda discovered, after the battle in the ruins of the Avengers compound, was that S.W.O.R.D. had acquired Vision's disassembled body and was using it for parts. She went to a plot of land in Westview that Vision had apparently bought for them. There's a foundation with a note on it, the deed to the land, a little sketch of a house they were going to build together. And something inside Wanda broke in a way that her chaos magic took very literally. She wrapped the entire town in a hex, a bubble of reality warping energy that she filled with a sitcom version of the life she was supposed to have. Vision came back, not the real Vision, because she couldn't truly resurrect someone, but a construct made of her power and grief that looked and sounded and felt exactly like him. A house, a neighborhood, a life. The show formats each episode as a different decade of American television. The first 2 episodes are black and white. 1950s sitcom, big laughs, studio audience, comedy of manners. Episode 3 goes colour, late 1960s. Then it's the Brady Bunch era. Then Family Ties. Then Malcolm in the Middle. The format itself is the emotional language. Every time Wanda's grief pushes closer to the surface, she jumps forward in time, rewriting the sitcom to outrun it. She creates twin sons, Billy and Tommy, who age rapidly within the hex because children grow and change and progress, and Wanda can't stop that happening, even within her own constructed world. The sitcom format isn't just clever, which I think is the thing about WandaVision that stays with me. It's structurally the right choice. Sitcoms are about comfort, repetition, familiar resolution. Problems come up and get solved in 22 minutes. Nobody's grief is permanent. The studio audience laughs at the right moments. Wanda built herself the ultimate coping mechanism, a world where the rules of television apply, where things work out, where Vision can never really be gone because the episode always ends and then he's back tomorrow. Outside the hex, Sword is trying to figure out what's happening. Agent Monique Rambeau. And we'll talk properly about Monica later. But for now, she's the daughter of Carol Danvers' best friend, Maria. She was among the blipped. She came back from the blip to find her mother had died of cancer in the 5 years she was gone. Monica is one of the first people sent in to investigate. She gets pushed out of the hex and then tries to go back in voluntarily, and the hex changes her at a cellular level. Something shifts in her biology. She'll feel it later. Sword's director is not particularly sympathetic. He wants to destroy the Vision construct, and he's not enormously concerned about the 4,000 people living inside the hex while he goes about doing it. Darcy Lewis, the astrophysicist from the Thor films, who is now apparently a doctor of astrophysics, is on the scene doing the scientific analysis. She and Monica and an FBI agent named Jimmy Woo form a little external team trying to understand what's happening and help Wanda without making it worse. Then there's Agnes, the nosy neighbour. She's been a constant presence across every decade of the sitcom, always there with a quip and a casserole dish. Her name is actually Agatha Harkness. She's an enormously powerful witch who has been quietly siphoning Wanda's chaos magic for herself, feeding off it, studying it. Her reveal episode, where the credits roll to a delightfully catchy villain song, is one of the genuinely surprising moments of Phase 4, because the show had kept her so thoroughly in the background that it's easy not to see it coming. What Agatha understands and what she reveals to Wanda is that Wanda isn't just a powerful witch, she's something called the Scarlet Witch, a mythological figure, a being of pure chaos magic, whose potential power actually exceeds that of the Sorcerer Supreme. The Darkhold, an ancient and deeply bad book of dark magic, apparently has an entire chapter written about her. Wanda didn't know any of this. She was just a woman in grief. The finale involves the Vision construct and a genuine Vision, a white, emotionless version of Vision's body that Sword had rebuilt and weaponized, having a philosophical conversation mid-battle about the ship of Theseus, which is not something you often get in a superhero story. The constructed Vision asks the real one what he is. The real one responds thoughtfully about the persistence of self through change. It's a properly good scene. Wanda ultimately brings the hex down. She frees the people of Westview, though several of them are furious with her understandably, because their free will was taken for weeks. She says goodbye to the Vision construct. She watches Billy and Tommy disappear as the hex collapses, because they only existed within it. And then she leaves. She goes to a remote cabin somewhere with a mountain view, and she sits down and she opens the Darkhold. The last shot of the show is Wanda in her astral form, reading the Darkhold at the kitchen table, while her body sleeps, and very faintly, somewhere across the multiverse, she hears her boys calling for her. That sound is going to cause a lot of problems. Before the Vision construct disappears, he tells Wanda something she needed to hear, that they have said goodbye before, so it stands to reason they will say hello again, that her grief does not define the limits of what she's capable of. It is, for a character made of her own projected love, a remarkably generous thing to say. He won't remember saying it, he won't remember any of it, but she will. Something in WandaVision that I keep coming back to is a detail that sets up a lot of what follows. The show reveals that Wanda's powers were not entirely created by the Mind Stone experiment, as everyone had assumed. The stone amplified and shaped something that was already there. A chaos magic ability she was born with, latent and untouched until the stone unlocked it. Her power is genuinely her own, not a side effect of an experiment or a cosmic accident. It belongs to her completely. The Darkhold chapter, written about the Scarlet Witch, predates her by centuries. Someone somewhere, far in the past, prophesied her existence. That's a considerable amount of weight to place on a woman who just wanted a house in New Jersey. There's also the strange quality of the vision construct itself that I think is worth sitting with. He isn't a resurrection. What Wanda created is something built from grief and chaos magic and the residual energy of the Mind Stone that still lives within her. He thinks, he feels, he loves her. He develops independent concerns about what's happening to the people trapped in the Hex. In the finale, he fights for those people's safety rather than purely for Wanda. Whatever he is, whether he constitutes genuine consciousness or the most elaborate illusion ever produced, he behaves as someone with his own inner life. And he's lost at the end regardless, which the show doesn't minimize. The episode where Wanda revisits her own memories to show Agatha how her powers developed is quietly excellent. It visits her childhood in Sokovia, watching American sitcoms with her family as a form of escape and comfort during difficult times. It explains the Hex's format. The Brady Bunch wasn't just a template, it was the thing she ran to when things were difficult. She built her grief shelter out of the material she had. There's a moment early in The Falcon and the Winter Soldier where Sam Wilson goes to the Smithsonian and donates the Captain America shield. He hands it over to a museum curator and watches it get placed in a display case. And there's something in Anthony Mackie's face in that scene that says everything about why he did it. He's not sure he's supposed to have it. He's not sure what it means for him to have it. Steve Rogers handed him that shield at the end of Endgame, in front of Bucky Barnes and Bruce Banner, as an old man choosing who carried his legacy forward. And Sam looked at it and apparently decided, I don't know, give me some time. Which is a more honest response than most people would admit to. The show opened 6 months after Endgame, and the world is still sorting itself out. The blip returned half the global population at once, which created a housing crisis, a refugee crisis, and a general disruption to the systems that had formed in the 5 years of absence. A group called the Flag Smashers has emerged from that chaos, people who believed the world that formed during the blip, where borders mattered less because governments were depleted and people moved where they needed to, was actually better. Carly Morgenthau leads them. She is, it must be said, not wrong about everything. She's just making increasingly terrible decisions about how to act on what she's right about. While Sam is trying to sort through his feelings about the shield, the United States government has quietly given it to someone else. John Walker, decorated soldier, 3 Medal of Honor winner, everything on paper that you'd want in a Captain America. He's introduced at a stadium with crowds cheering and a media campaign and an enormous amount of confident energy. And he means well, which makes what happens to him more uncomfortable rather than less. Because John Walker is not built for what the shield requires. He's built for war, for clear orders, for the kind of situation where you know which side you're on. Being Captain America means being a symbol in ambiguous situations, and ambiguity eats him alive. When his partner Lumar Hoskins is killed in a Flag Smasher operation, Walker takes the shield and kills a surrendered man in a public square, in front of cameras, with Captain America's face on. It's a shattering scene because Walker isn't villainous. He's a good man in the wrong role, and grief did the rest. They strip him of the shield and the title. He gets a quiet other than honourable discharge and a visit from Valentina Allegrue de Fontaine, a shadowy intelligence figure who tells him the world needs people willing to do hard things, and she might have work for him. More on Valentina later. She keeps showing up. Bucky Barnes runs parallel to all of this. He's been living quietly, going to therapy as a condition of his pardon. working through a list of people he hurt as the Winter Soldier and trying to make amends. His amends process is not going smoothly, partly because Bucky is not emotionally equipped for vulnerability, and partly because one of the men on his list is an old man who doesn't know that the friendly man who used to visit him was also the assassin who killed his son decades ago. It's grim, quiet work, the kind of reckoning the MCU doesn't usually take the time to show. Sam and Bucky end up working together, despite neither of them particularly wanting to. They go to Berlin. They go to a criminal safe haven called Madripoor to find information about the re-emergence of the super soldier serum. They find Zemo, who is still in prison, but who knows things they need, and they break him out, which is either a terrible decision or an understandable one, depending on your perspective. Zemo is deeply entertaining throughout this show, which you wouldn't necessarily have predicted from Civil War, where he was quiet and methodical and devastating. Here he's got his purple mask and an inexplicable number of private jets and opinions about the marvellous Mrs. Maisel. The most important scene in the whole series, though, is the one with Isaiah Bradley. Sam finds out that there was a black super soldier before Steve Rogers, after him, a man who was given the serum during the Korean War and used as a weapon, then imprisoned for 30 years by the American government because they didn't want to admit what they'd done. His story was buried, he was erased, and when Sam goes to talk to him, Isaiah Bradley makes very clear that he does not think Sam should carry that shield. Not because Sam isn't capable, because of what the shield represents and who it has historically been for. That scene is angry and quiet and important, and it's why when Sam eventually picks up the shield and becomes Captain America, the weight of the decision has been fully established. He's not just accepting an honour, he's making an argument about what the symbol should mean going forward and who gets to decide that. He gets a new suit as a gift from the Wakandans. He makes a speech that is one of the more direct political speeches in MCU history, about the weight of living in a world that never gave people like him the benefit of the doubt. And he flies into action as the new Captain America, with wings and the shield together, looking genuinely like the version of the character from the comics in the best possible way. The ending also quietly resolves Bucky's arc. He finishes his amends work. He tells the old man the truth. And while we don't fully see the conversation, we understand that Bucky is moving from a life defined by what was done to him towards something he's choosing for himself, which is, in a small way, what the whole show is about. The flag smashers as a concept deserve a bit more attention than they sometimes get in discussions of that show. Carly Morgenthau is, in the context of the blip's return, arguing for something genuinely reasonable, that the world that formed during those 5 years of absence, which redistributed resources and erased some of the bureaucratic barriers between nations, was more functional and more equitable than the world that preceded it. She watched people survive and rebuild and create community in those 5 years, and then everyone came back and the old systems reasserted themselves, and people who'd built new lives found those lives revoked. Her methods become inexcusable. She kills people, she uses the super soldier serum, she escalates. But the argument she's making isn't wrong. The show is honest about that, which is one of the things that elevates it above a straightforward hero versus villain structure. Sam doesn't defeat her ideology. He acknowledges it while refusing to accept the violence she used to express it. The new Captain America suit that Wakanda builds for Sam carries quite a lot of meaning in a fairly small detail. Wakanda providing it is a statement, the most technologically advanced nation on Earth, choosing to outfit the American Captain America with armour that came from their hands. It places Sam within a global frame rather than a purely American one, which is appropriate for a symbol that has always been about an idea rather than a country specifically. There's also Bucky's final arc with the old man named Yuri, who used to meet Bucky for breakfast and share stories and didn't know that his son was killed by the Winter Soldier. Bucky eventually tells him the truth. We don't see the conversation. The camera stays outside, which is the right choice. Some conversations are private, and the point is that Bucky finally had it, rather than what was said. In Avengers Endgame, when the Avengers go back to 2012 New York to steal the Tesseract during the battle of the first Avengers film, things go slightly wrong. The Tesseract ends up on the floor near 2012 Loki, who is a prisoner at that point. He picks it up, looks at the Tesseract, and disappears. Just gone. He creates a branch in the timeline and vanishes into it. That version of Loki, not the one from Thor, Ragnarok or Infinity War, not the one who spent years growing and changing and eventually dying heroically. The 2012 version, the villain of the original Avengers, who hasn't done any of that yet, lands in the middle of a desert and immediately gets arrested by the Time Variance Authority. The TVA is one of the more original concepts the MCU has introduced. It exists outside of time in a sort of bureaucratic limbo that looks vaguely like the 1970s crossed with a fascist government building. Its job is to maintain the sacred timeline, one single timeline that is permitted to exist, by identifying branches and pruning them. Variants, people who deviate from their fated path, get arrested, put on trial, and reset or erased. The TVA employs people who are themselves variants, pulled from timelines, and reprogrammed with new memories, who now enforce the rules without knowing they were ever anyone else. It's a fascinating setting because it's a bureaucracy that commits cosmic violence and does the paperwork about it. There's a Miss Minutes, an animated clock mascot, promotional materials, training videos. The horror of what it actually is sits just underneath all of that cheerful administration. Loki gets assigned to work with a TVA agent named Mobius. Owen Wilson, deeply relaxed, genuinely warm, a man who has spent a professional lifetime studying Loki variants and who has somehow concluded that this particular Loki is more interesting than he is dangerous. They develop a friendship, which neither of them would describe as such. Mobius wants Loki's help catching a rogue variant who has been attacking TVA teams. Loki, who has very few options, agrees. The rogue variant turns out to be a woman, a different version of Loki. She was taken from her timeline as a child, different enough from the main Loki variant that the TVA had always considered her a branch that needed pruning, and she's been running from them ever since. Her name is Sylvie. She's been planning to kill the people at the top of the TVA for most of her adult life, and she is extremely good at it. The show does something quietly interesting with Sylvie and Loki's dynamic. They're the same person, sort of, but they're not. Loki spent his life in a palace. Sylvie spent hers being hunted. Their personalities diverged enormously from the same starting point. And then they develop feelings for each other, which is either philosophically fascinating or deeply weird, depending on how charitably you're feeling about it. The TVA flags it immediately. Two Loki variants becoming close creates a nexus event, a disruption significant enough to branch the timeline, which suggests that whatever they're feeling is meaningful at a cosmic level. They get stranded on a moon called Lamentis that is about to be destroyed and nearly die, and during the near death they have a genuinely good conversation about who they are and what they want, sitting watching meteors hit the surface of a doomed world. It's one of those quiet scenes in the middle of a lot of action that you remember. Sylvie's plan is to get to the end of time and kill whoever is running the TVA. The idea that someone built this entire apparatus and has been pruning timelines across all of history, that's the thing she wants to stop. Loki agrees to help her, half because he believes she's right, and half because he doesn't want her to get killed trying. At the Citadel, at the end of time, they find a man called He Who Remains. He's relaxed to the point of being unsettling, wearing a comfortable jumper, waiting for them. He explains that he won a multiversal war, that in the distant future, variants of himself discovered the multiverse, and some of them were peaceful, and some weren't. And after a devastating conflict across realities, his version survived and built the TVA to prevent it ever happening again. By controlling the sacred timeline, he prevents his worst variants from rising. The pruning isn't cruelty for its own sake. It's an attempt to protect existence from something worse. He offers them a choice. Take over the TVA and keep running it, or kill him and let the multiverse branch freely, which will inevitably lead to one of his worst variants rising. Sylvie kills him. Loki lands back at TVA headquarters to tell Mobius what happened, and Mobius doesn't know who he is. The statues in the lobby aren't of he who remains anymore. The timeline has branched. Something new has begun. The first season ends on that image of branching timelines, spreading out like roots from a single point, unstable and new, with Loki standing in a place that has already become different from the one he left. Realizing that killing he who remains might not have been the uncomplicated victory Sylvie believed it was. The show has a genuinely clever structural detail in how it handles the TVA's employees. They're all variants, real people who were pulled from their original timelines, had their memories replaced and were set to work maintaining the system that erased their lives. Mobius was a jet ski salesman somewhere on Earth, in all likelihood. He spent his entire TVA career fascinated by jet ski history, which is a small lovely detail about the way traces of a real self persist, even when the memory is gone. Hunter B-15, one of the TVA's most capable agents, is the first to investigate her own original identity. She finds herself, or a version of herself, in a timeline she was pulled from, and the emotional quality of that recognition, standing in front of someone who is you but doesn't know it, is handled with real care. The show is quietly interested in the violence of having your life erased and replaced, even when the replacement life has meaning and purpose. Sylvie's backstory makes the contrast between them particularly sharp. She was taken from her timeline as a child, which means she has no memory of her original life at all, only the life of running from the TVA. Loki was taken as an adult with full memories. They both ended up as Loki variants, but their experiences of that identity are entirely different. He had a palace and a father and an identity before all this. She had all of that. Her anger is older and more structural than his. The relationship between them is also, at a narrative level, the show's way of asking what it means to love a version of yourself. Not in a romantic sense, but in the broader sense of recognizing your own patterns and tendencies in someone else, and choosing to understand them rather than flee. These two films came out within a couple of months of each other in 2021, and they're doing different things, but they share a quality that I find interesting. They're both about people who grew up shaped entirely by someone else's violence, trying to figure out who they are when that violence is finally examined in daylight. Black Widow is set between Civil War and Infinity War, so chronologically it happened years before Endgame, but it was released after, which gives it this particular feeling. You're watching Natasha Romanoff, who you know is already dead at this point in the MCU's release timeline, navigate a chapter of her life that existed in the gap between films. She's alive here, she's sharp and difficult and genuinely funny, and you spend the whole film slightly aware that she doesn't make it. The plot concerns the Red Room, the Soviet program that trained Natasha and has been running ever since, creating Black Widows and using a chemical aerosol to keep them in a state of psychological subjugation. The man running it, Dreykov, believes he's built the perfect intelligence operation. Every Black Widow is a sleeper asset, controllable, disposable, loyal not from conviction, but from chemistry. Natasha's found family of sorts here is her family from an undercover assignment in Ohio years ago. A Soviet spy couple, Alexei and Melina, who lived as an American family with Natasha and her younger sister, Yelena, for 3 years before the assignment ended and they were all pulled back. Alexei is the Red Guardian, the Soviet Union's answer to Captain America, a big, loud, slightly ridiculous man who spent over 20 years in prison and still tells stories about fighting Captain America that may or may not be accurate. Melina is a brilliant scientist who has spent her career helping the Red Room, And Yelena is Natasha's sister, in every sense that matters, who has only recently been freed from the Red Room's chemical control and is deeply, justifiably furious about everything. The film is about taking the Red Room apart, freeing the widows, making a choice to burn down the apparatus that made you rather than keep living around it. Natasha does that, in the end, while already a fugitive from the law, because she can't not. The post-credits scene is Yelena at Natasha's grave, mourning quietly, and then Valentina Allegrudu Fontaine appears, the same woman who approached John Walker, and offers Yelena a job. The target, she says, showing her a photograph, is the man responsible for Natasha's death. The photograph is Clint Barton. Yelena takes the job. We'll come back to that. Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings arrives with a completely different energy. Where Black Widow is dark and grounded, Shang-Chi is genuinely vibrant. It moves fast, it's funny, and it has a mythological depth that the MCU doesn't always take the time to build. Shu Sean works as a valet parker in San Francisco with his best friend Katie. They go to karaoke and eat dumplings and generally live a pleasant, uncomplicated life. And then men on a bus try to steal the jade pendant Sean wears around his neck. And Sean does something extraordinary in response. And Katie watches from the back of the bus thinking, right then, who exactly are you? His name is actually Shu Shang-Chi. His father is Shu Wenwu, a man who found 10 ancient rings somewhere in the distant past. Rings that grant their wearer immense power and apparent immortality. Wenwu built criminal empires across centuries and then disbanded them all when he fell in love with a woman named Ying Li, who lived in a mythological place called Ta Lo. He gave up the rings for her. They had children. She was killed by enemies of his past. He put the rings back on. Shang-Chi grew up in his father's compound, trained in combat from early childhood, and then at 14 was sent to find the man who killed his mother, which is not something to do to a 14-year-old, whatever else you might say about Wenwu's parenting. Shang-Chi completed the mission and then walked away from his father's world entirely, changed his name, moved to San Francisco, and tried to be ordinary. Tony Leung plays Wenwu, and he is extraordinary in this film. Wenwu is technically the villain. He is doing destructive things and endangering people, but the film never treats him as simply villainous. He's a man of immense power and genuine grief who has become convinced that his dead wife is calling to him from beyond a magical gate in Ta Lo. He hears her voice. It's real to him. The love is real, the loss is real, and the story tells both with full seriousness. What's actually behind the gate is not his wife. It's a creature called the Dweller in Darkness, a massive, soul-devouring entity that has been imprisoned for centuries and has been using the sound of Ying Li's voice to manipulate Wenwu into opening its prison. The grief of a powerful man weaponized against him. It's genuinely affecting when the truth becomes clear. The resolution involves Shang-Chi claiming the 10 rings as his birthright, Katie firing a very significant arrow, and the great protector of Ta Lo turning out to be a dragon, which is handled with exactly the right seriousness and warmth. The rings, after the battle, send out a signal that Wong and Bruce Banner and Carol Danvers all detect. Something old and powerful has a new bearer, and the wider world is paying attention. Katie remains beside Shang-Chi as his closest friend and unlikely archer, and Xialing, Shang-Chi's sister, who has been running her own underground operation and who deserves a film of her own, honestly, takes over their father's organization and presumably does something interesting with it that we'll see eventually. One thing about the Black Widow film that's worth dwelling on, Yelena is genuinely one of the most interesting characters introduced in this era, and she carries the film's emotional weight more than Natasha does in some respects. Natasha is the protagonist, but Natasha has made peace with what she is. Yelena hasn't. Yelena was freed from the Red Room's chemical control relatively recently, and is still processing what it meant to have her own emotions, be manufactured and manipulated. There's a scene where she talks about how she doesn't know which of her feelings are real, which choices she made freely, Whether the life she lived before the Red Room was broken was genuinely hers or a construction. She's funny about it. She keeps being funny about genuinely devastating things, which is a coping mechanism, and also her personality. But the question underneath is real. How do you know who you are when something else has been in the driver's seat? The answer, in some sense, is that you trust the choices you make now, which is what Natasha says, more or less, by example, rather than explanation. With Shang-Chi, it's worth adding that the film places enormous weight on the idea of duality in identity. Sean the valet Parker and Shang-Chi the warrior's son exist as genuine, separate ways of being in the world, not as a secret identity and a false one. Both are real. His mother's heritage from Tarlo and his father's history with the rings both run in him, and neither one cancels the other out. The rings at the end go to him not because he chose them, but because they recognize him. And what they recognize is that combination. Here's a question the MCU had been quietly avoiding for a very long time. Where did life come from? And did anyone make it on purpose? And if so, why? Eternals answers that question. The answer is both more interesting and more horrifying than you might expect. The Celestials are cosmic entities of incomprehensible scale. They've been seeding planets with life across billions of years, not out of benevolence, but because new life generates enough energy for an event called the emergence, which feeds the development of a new celestial growing inside the planet's core. When the celestial matures, it cracks the planet apart and emerges into the universe. The planet is destroyed. All life on it dies. This is not a side effect. This is the mechanism. Earth is one of these incubation planets. There is a celestial called Tiamut growing in the core. And the Eternals, 10 synthetic beings created by a celestial called Arishem, were sent here 7,000 years ago, ostensibly to protect humanity from a race of creatures called deviants, which they did. But the actual reason for their presence was more specific. They were here to allow the human population to grow large enough that Tiamut's emergence could be powered. They weren't protecting humanity. They were farming it. Most of the Eternals didn't know this. One of them did, and chose to keep the secret. Let me introduce them because they're worth knowing individually. Cersei is warm, compassionate, endlessly interested in humans. She's been living in London, working as a museum curator, in a relationship with a human man named Dane Whitman. Her power is transmutation. She can change the matter of things, turn a bus into flower petals, turn a deviant to stone. She becomes the de facto leader of the group when their actual leader is killed. Ikaris can fly and shoot cosmic energy from his eyes, which makes him look extremely like Superman, which the film is aware of and makes a joke about. He is principled and serious, and carries a secret across the entire film. He's known about the emergence since they left Babylon, centuries after they landed on Earth. He chose Arishem's mission over humanity. He's the reason their leader died. He killed her when she decided to stop the emergence. He spends the film pretending he doesn't know this, protecting the mission from within, and by the end the weight of it has become impossible to carry. He flies into the sun, deliberately. He can't face Arishem's judgment, and he can't live with what he chose. Dina is one of the most powerful fighters among them, a combat genius who has spent thousands of years protecting people with extraordinary skill. She also suffers from Mad Riri, a condition that affects Eternals who accumulate too many millennia of memory. She has episodes where past selves emerge and she becomes dangerous. Gilgamesh, the largest and most physically powerful of them, has spent centuries as her caretaker and companion, keeping her grounded, choosing to stay with her rather than live any other life. Sprite is the smallest, appears to be a child, has been that apparent age for 7,000 years, while watching humans grow up and grow old and have lives she can never have. She creates incredibly convincing illusions and has spent millennia writing the myths humans tell about gods and heroes. She is tired in a way that 7,000 years of arrested development would make you tired. Druig can control human minds, a power he finds both useful and deeply uncomfortable. He used it to stop wars once. He watched humans continue to commit atrocities regardless, and eventually retreated to the Amazon. Living among a community he'd kept in a kind of peace through subtle influence, away from the rest of the team. Makari is deaf, which is fairly unusual for a superhuman character, and uses superhuman speed. She has spent centuries in their ship, collecting artifacts from human civilizations, not stealing exactly, more like archiving. There are underground chambers full of thousands of years of human culture. She has a particular fondness for things that are beautiful and strange. Fastos is an engineer and inventor of staggering capability. He contributed to human technological advancement at multiple points in history, nudging civilizations forward. He gave up on humanity after Hiroshima, devastated by what he'd indirectly helped enable, and has been living a quiet domestic life with his husband and their son. He's the most fully integrated into human life of any of them. Kingo became a Bollywood star, several generations of Bollywood star actually. Since he can't age, he's been playing himself, father to son to grandson, across decades. He's brought his valet on this mission to film a documentary. He is very funny, and also genuinely conflicted about the mission. In the final confrontation, he doesn't fight, not because he couldn't, but because he can't choose between Arishem's plan and his love for humanity. He just walks away. I find that oddly moving. He doesn't pretend he's made peace with it. Arjak is their leader, the one with a direct communication link to Arishem. She had discovered the truth about the emergence sometime before the film begins and had decided to try to stop it. Ikaris killed her for that decision. When the remaining Eternals learn the truth, they have to choose. The emergence will destroy Earth. Arishem wants them to let it happen, because the new Celestial will eventually seed more life than was lost. But they've been living here for 7,000 years. These are their people. They combine their power in something called the Uni-Mind, and they halt Tiamut's emergence. They stop it cold. Tiamut's hand is still visible in the Indian Ocean. This enormous stone hand sticking out of the water, which turns out to matter in a later film when someone discovers that the material inside it is extraordinarily valuable. But the Earth survives. Arishem takes 3 of them as punishment. The others fly off to find other Eternals across the universe. And in a post-credits scene, Thana and Makari and Druig encounter an extraordinarily eccentric man called Starfox, who is, among other things, Thanos' brother, offering his help. The Eternal Saga is not finished. It's just moved to a different location. The Ikaris arc in Eternals is one of the more quietly devastating things in Phase 4. He is, by every visual and power measure, the Superman of the story. He flies, he shoots beams from his eyes. He is nearly indestructible. And the film uses that expectation deliberately. You spend the first 2/3 of the film assuming he is straightforwardly heroic. Then you learn what he's been doing for 7,000 years. He killed Ajak because she changed her mind. She was going to try to stop the emergence. He chose Arishem's mission over the woman who had been his leader and his moral compass for millennia. And he did it deliberately, and he spent the rest of the film pretending he didn't. There's a scene where he confesses to Cersei, and the framing allows you to see that he expected, on some level, to be argued out of his position. He wanted to be told he'd made the right choice. She doesn't give him that. When the rest of the Eternals decide to stop the emergence, Ikaris fights them. He fights his own family. He is genuinely powerful enough that it's a real contest. And when it's over, and Tiamut is stopped, and Cersei is crying, and the Earth is intact, Ikaris just leaves. He goes up. He flies into the sun. Not in a rage, not in a dramatic climax, in silence. He can't face Arishem. He can't live with what he chose. He was built to serve a purpose, and he destroyed everything that mattered to him in service of it. Sprite's arc is worth a mention too. She spends 7,000 years appearing to be about 11 years old, watching humans age and grow and fall in love, while she stays exactly the same. She helped write the myths that gave human culture some of its deepest stories, and she couldn't participate in the life she was writing about. Her decision, at the end, to use Cersei's power to become human, to truly age, to be mortal, is the most specific and strange happy ending in any MCU story. It starts with a video. Mysterio's final gift before he died, a doctored recording played across global media that shows Peter Parker's face, names him as Spider-Man, and frames him for the destruction in London. It's disseminated through every platform simultaneously. By the time Peter lands on a rooftop in Queens, the whole world knows. The fallout is immediate and comprehensive. Criminal charges, media circus, college applications rejected, MIT, the dream, gone. Peter's girlfriend MJ and his best friend Ned are implicated by association and face consequences they never earned. Peter's Aunt May has reporters outside her door. The ordinary New York life Peter has been trying to hold on to while being Spider-Man is simply gone, overnight, because of a dead man's lie. There's a brief funny scene where Matt Murdock, the daredevil, a blind lawyer who fights crime at night, here appearing as Peter's legal counsel, catches a brick that gets thrown through the apartment window without looking at it. He doesn't explain this, Peter doesn't ask. Peter goes to Doctor Strange. He asks if Strange can cast a spell that would make everyone forget that Peter Parker is Spider-Man. Strange agrees, a little too readily honestly, and begins the incantation. And then Peter starts adding conditions. He wants MJ to remember, and Ned, and his aunt, and Happy, and Ned, because Peter specifically asks. Strange tries to contain the fracturing spell in a crystal. He fails, barely, and seals it. The damage, he thinks, is done. He doesn't know yet what Peter inadvertently invited in, because the broken spell reached across the multiverse and started pulling people who know that Peter Parker is Spider-Man. Not variants of Peter, not other versions of him. People from entirely different universes who know his name and his face. And several of them are people who, in their own universes, fought and lost against their version of Peter Parker. Dr. Otto Octavius arrives first, then Max Dillon, Electro, Flint Marko, the Sandman, Curtis Connors, the Lizard, and Norman Osborn, the Green Goblin. These are the major villains from the Sam Raimi Spider-Man films and the Mark Webb Amazing Spider-Man films, pulled from their timelines, all of them somewhat disoriented by the experience of suddenly being in a different universe. Strange's position is that they need to be sent back immediately, as they were, which for most of them means returning to moments where they died or were at the edge of defeat. Peter refuses. The Sandman, he points out, is a desperate father who turned to crime out of need. Octavius is a brilliant scientist whose accident gave him thinking tentacles that influenced his mind. Electro is a forgotten man who was transformed by something that wasn't his fault. The Lizard is trying to cure a genuine disability through means that went wrong. These aren't evil people. They're people in difficult situations who made bad choices or had their situations made worse by forces outside themselves. Peter wants to cure them before they're sent back. Strange disagrees, strongly, in a scene involving the mirror dimension and the time stone and a rather spectacular chase sequence. Strange loses the argument and also his sling ring, and Peter takes the sling ring to Happy Hogan's apartment and begins working on cures with MJ and Ned's help. Things go well enough that Peter starts to believe this might actually work. And then Norman Osborn, who has a split personality, the man and the goblin, has an episode. The goblin wrecks the operation. And in the chaos, in Happy's apartment building lobby, during a confrontation, Aunt May is mortally wounded. She dies in Peter's arms. And the last thing she says is, "With great power comes great responsibility," which is the line. The Spider-Man line. The one that has been implied and referenced and used as shorthand across 3 decades of Spider-Man storytelling. And here it's spoken clearly, once, by the woman who raised him, as she dies. No notes, really. Peter goes to the Statue of Liberty for the final confrontation, consumed by grief and fury. And Ned, with Strange's sling ring, accidentally pulls in 2 more visitors. A Peter Parker from a different universe. Another one. The first of the 2 Peter Parkers, older, warmer, more settled in himself, is Andrew Garfield's Peter. The first is Andrew Garfield's. 3 Spider-Men. Same name, same basic situation, entirely different lives. What this sequence does with Andrew Garfield's Peter is genuinely lovely. In his own universe, he failed to save Gwen Stacy. He didn't catch her in time. That failure has defined him quietly for years. And during the battle at the Statue of Liberty, MJ Fool, Misa, and Andrew Garfield's Peter catches her. He catches her, and he's crying, quietly, doing it, because she's not Gwen, and she's alive, and he's been given something his own universe didn't give him. It is a very effective 2 minutes of film. The 3 Peters defeat the villains, cure most of them, and face the fundamental problem. The multiverse is continuing to fracture. The only solution Strange can see is to reverse the spell entirely. Not just make people forget Peter Parker is Spider-Man, but make everyone forget that Peter Parker exists at all. Peter has a moment with MJ. She says they'll find each other again. He says maybe. He has to do this. He has to. Strange casts the spell. The multiverse seals. The 2 other Peters go home, and Peter Parker is erased from the memory of the world. His birth record changes. His school records don't exist. The people who loved him, MJ, Ned, Happy, simply don't know who he is. He visits MJ at the coffee shop where she works. She doesn't recognize him. He almost says something, and then he doesn't, because bringing her back into his life would only put her in danger again. He is a boy who can stop a train with his bare hands, and he can't fix this, and he walks away. The final shot is Peter in a small, modest apartment. No Stark technology, no Avengers support, nobody who knows his name, pulling on a homemade suit and swinging out into a snowy New York, alone, doing it anyway. The 3 Spider-Man sequence at Happy Hogan's apartment is one of those things the writers clearly understood they had, and they were right to take their time with it. 3 actors who played the same character at different points in their lives, allowed to talk to each other about it. The oldest Peter, Tobey Maguire's version, is warm and settled in the way of someone who has been through considerable difficulty and come out the other side with some peace intact. He's the oldest. He's been doing this the longest. He's broken up with MJ and then found a way back to her, and he carries that lightly now. Andrew Garfield's Peter is somewhere in the middle, capable, experienced, still carrying the weight of Gwen Stacy's death in a way that hasn't fully processed. He's been going it mostly alone in his universe. He is, in this unexpected cross-dimensional reunion, visibly moved by being in the company of people who understand exactly what his life is. And Tom Holland's Peter is the youngest, the most recently devastated, running on grief and fury, needing something he doesn't know how to ask for. The 2 older Peters give it to him anyway. They make him laugh briefly. They validate his impulse toward redemption for the villains. And when the battle goes wrong, and he's consumed by the need to hurt Green Goblin, the older Tobey Maguire Peter physically holds him back, putting his body between Peter's grief and the act that grief wants to commit. That gesture is the whole point of the sequence. The older self preventing the younger self from doing something unforgivable. Wisdom that only exists because you've already been through the thing you're being protected from. Doctor Strange has a dream he doesn't understand. He's running through a place that isn't his universe, beside a girl he doesn't know, being chased by something enormous. In the dream, he makes a choice that kills him. He wakes up at a wedding where he's watching Christine Palmer marry someone else, and carries the unease of the dream into a morning that is about to get considerably more complicated. America Chavez falls through a portal into his universe. She is being chased by a creature made of something that looks like corrupted magic. She is 15 perhaps, frightened but not entirely without resources, and she has a power that she cannot control. She can punch holes through the multiverse. Under enough fear, under enough adrenaline, Her fist generates a star-shaped portal, and she falls through into a different universe. She's been doing this since she was a child, since a moment of crisis sent her tumbling through reality and separated her from her parents. She doesn't know how to stop it, or direct it, or do it on purpose. Whatever is hunting her, it wants that power. Strange figures out quickly enough that the creature is being controlled by someone with genuine magical ability. He and America go to Kamar-Taj, the home of the sorcerers, which is promptly attacked with terrible efficiency. The attacker demolishes the defenses that the combined sorcerers of Kamar-Taj can generate. And then she steps through the smoke, and Strange sees that it's Wanda. Or rather, it's the Wanda who spent the months after WandaVision reading the Darkhold alone in her cabin, hearing her boys calling from somewhere in the multiverse. The Darkhold is a book that warps the reader toward obsession. It doesn't invent desires, it amplifies them, directs them, strips away everything that might complicate the thing you want most. What Wanda wanted most was her sons. The Darkhold took that longing and made it into a mission. She wants to find a universe where her children exist, where a version of her is raising Billy and Tommy, and possess that version of herself permanently, displacing her in favor of Wanda's consciousness. She needs America's power to do it, and she is willing to do anything, absolutely anything, to any obstacle between herself and that goal. Strange and America escape to a different universe, Earth 838, where a group called the Illuminati governs, and things run somewhat differently. This universe's Strange died preventing a crisis, so the Illuminati have no reason to trust the visiting Strange. They take America and imprison him. And then Wanda, using a technique called dreamwalking, projecting her consciousness into the body of her counterpart in another universe, arrives at the Illuminati's headquarters. The Illuminati consists of Charles Xavier in his golden floating chair, a version of Reed Richards, a version of Captain Marvel, a version of Captain Carter, and Black Bolt, a man whose voice is so powerful that a whisper can level a mountain. They have defeated a version of the Scarlet Witch before. They are confident. They are not prepared for the Wanda currently walking toward them. She kills Black Bolt by closing his mouth so his power turns inward. She tears Reed Richards apart. She crushes Captain Marvel. She snaps Xavier's neck while he's inside her mind, trying to reach the Wanda beneath the corruption. It happens quickly and brutally, and the film does not look away from it. The scene is intended to be shocking, and it is. Strange escapes. He finds the Book of Vishanti in this universe, the antithesis of the Darkhold, a text of pure protective magic. But Wanda arrives through dreamwalking and burns it to ashes before he can use it. He then makes a decision that requires a certain amount of nerve. He dreamwalks himself, projecting into the body of a deceased version of himself from another universe who is buried. This works, though Strange notes that it is deeply unpleasant. The final confrontation is at Mount Wundagora, Wanda's base of operations in the main universe, where she has been consolidating her power. Strange fights her, America fights her, and then America does something that Strange couldn't have managed. She opens a portal to a universe where Wanda's children are alive and well and happy, and she shows Wanda what those children do when they see their mother approaching. They're frightened. They don't know her, this creature of power and obsession who has murdered dozens of people. To reach them is a stranger to them, and a frightening one. Wanda sees it in their faces. The Darkhold's corruption breaks briefly in the light of that truth, that the children she wanted so desperately would not love the version of herself she'd become. In that moment of clarity, Wanda makes a choice. She uses everything she has to collapse Mount Wundagore and, simultaneously, to destroy every copy of the Darkhold that exists in every universe. The mountain comes down. Wanda appears to die in it, though whether she actually does has been left deliberately unclear. America Chavez finds her place at Kamar-Taj, beginning to train properly, surrounded by people who value what she is. Strange returns to his own dimension with a third eye on his forehead, a mark of expanded magical perception that appears there after the dream walking. He attends another event where he sees Christine again, and this time there's something more settled about it, a grief that's been processed rather than avoided. The film ends not cleanly, but livably. Strange is changed, America is training, Wanda is somewhere between dead and something else. The multiverse continues to exist, damaged and branching, with more complications yet to arrive. Doctor Strange, in the Multiverse of Madness, leans into horror in a way that MCU doesn't usually allow itself to. Sam Raimi directed it, which is relevant. He made the Evil Dead films, he made Drag Me to Hell, he understands the grammar of horror. The film uses that grammar. Wanda moves through spaces like a slasher, appearing behind glass, emerging from shadows. Her attack on Kamar-Taj has the structure of a monster movie. The sequence where she hunts Strange in America through the halls of a facility has genuine tension in a way that MCU action sequences don't always achieve. It also takes Wanda's grief seriously rather than quickly. There's a version of this film where Wanda is simply a villain to be defeated, where the Darkhold's corruption is an external force turning a good person bad. The film refuses that reading. The Darkhold amplified a desire that was genuine and human. She wanted her children. That wanting was real before the book arrived. The corruption didn't create the grief, it weaponized it. And that's a more honest and more frightening thing. America Chavez's backstory. 2 mothers, a peaceful home, a moment of fear and love, where her power activated and sent her tumbling through the multiverse alone, is the emotional engine of the film in a way that takes a while to become clear. Strange's arc is the active story. America's is the one the film is actually about, whether the power you were given out of love can be claimed by you on your own terms, rather than hunted by everyone who wants to use it. Strange's third eye, at the end, is the show's way of saying using the Darkhold changes you, even in service of good ends. Even when you survive and win, you carry the mark of what you did. The film opens on a desert somewhere, which is dying. The animals are dying. The people are dying. A man named Gore prays to his god with everything he has, and his god appears before him, and the god laughs at him. Actually laughs at his grief, at his daughter's death, at the audacity of a mortal asking a deity to care. That moment of divine contempt is the origin of Gore the God Butcher. Not a supervillain with an ideology, not a warlord with resources. A father who prayed and was mocked, who found a weapon in the desert that had been waiting for someone furious enough to use it. The Necrosword, a weapon that chooses its host and grants godlike power in exchange for the wielder's life. Gore picks it up, kills Rapu, and swears an oath to hunt down every god in the universe and exterminate them. This is the most sympathetic motivation any MCU villain has had since Thanos, and it's worth sitting with for a moment. Gore isn't wrong that Rapu was terrible. He isn't wrong that gods who are indifferent to mortal suffering are a genuine problem. His conclusion, kill all of them, is the place where it goes wrong. But the anger underneath it makes complete sense. Meanwhile, Thor has been travelling with the Guardians of the Galaxy, and the film opens with a montage of him helping them with various missions while simultaneously managing an identity crisis. He's a god without a purpose. Asgard is rebuilt as a tourist settlement on Earth called New Asgard. His friends are all dead or scattered. He's been trying to fill the emptiness with combat, and it's not working, which is an honest thing for the film to acknowledge. New Asgard gets attacked by Gore, and the children of the town are kidnapped and taken to the Shadow Realm, an alternate dimension that Gore has claimed as his operational base. This is what brings Thor home, and this is where he finds out about Jane Foster, his former partner, the brilliant astrophysicist. They broke up off-screen between films, which the movie acknowledges with what can only be described as mutual awkwardness. Jane has stage 4 cancer. Terminal. She came to New Asgard because she was drawn there somehow, inexplicably, pulled toward the mountains where the pieces of Mjolnir, Thor's old hammer, shattered by Hela in Ragnarok, lie on the ground. The pieces of Mjolnir reassemble when Jane approaches them. The hammer chooses her. She transforms into mighty Thor with the power of the storm and the strength of a god. It's a proper shock when Thor sees it. She's wielding his hammer. She's been chosen as worthy, and she looks extraordinary. The cost is this. Every time Jane transforms, Mjolnir temporarily halts her cancer treatment. Her body's fight against the illness pauses while the hammer's power runs through her. Every swing of the hammer in battle accelerates the progression of the disease. She knows this, a doctor told her. She is doing it anyway. There's a quiet exchange between them somewhere in the middle of the film where Thor tries to tell her to stop, and she essentially tells him that she gets to decide what to do with the time she has. Which is correct. The team, Thor, Mighty Thor, Valkyrie and Korg, go to Omnipotent City to ask the assembled gods for help. Zeus is there, enormous and vain and surrounded by luxury, and his response to Gorr's campaign of deicide is essentially, "Not my problem, I have a villa, don't bother me." He tries to stop them leaving. Thor steals his thunderbolt. Zeus is briefly paralysed by his own lightning and deeply offended. The battle in the Shadow Realm involves Thor temporarily giving the Asgardian children the power of the storm so they can fight Gorr's shadow creatures, which is one of the more genuinely joyful scenes in the film. A dozen terrified children suddenly discovering they can shoot lightning. They are delighted by this, as children given god powers would be. The final confrontation is at the gates of eternity, the entity at the centre of the universe, capable of granting one wish to whoever reaches it. Gorr reaches it. He has what he needs. He can wish all gods dead. His oath is almost complete. And Thor says something to him about his daughter, about the love underneath the oath, about grief that became hatred because he had nowhere else to put it. Thor, who has lost his mother, and his father, and his brother, and his home, and his hammer, speaking to Gorr about what it feels like to lose everything you love. Gorr wavers. The Necrosword breaks. He uses his wish to bring back his daughter, Love, a small girl who appears from nothing, whole and alive. Gorr dies as his wish takes effect, the sword's curse releasing him, but he dies knowing she's alive. Jane dies too. The accumulated damage of her transformations has done what the cancer would have anyway, only faster. Thor holds her. She enters Valhalla. The film shows us this briefly, and Heimdall is there to greet her, and she is at peace. Thor adopts Love, Gorr's daughter, now his. The epilogue shows them fighting together, this enormous god of thunder and a small fierce girl with cosmic power, and there is something genuinely warm about it. Thor found something to be for, which was what he needed. In the post-credits scene, Zeus sends his son Hercules after Thor for the business with the thunderbolt. Hercules is very gold and very certain of himself. Thor doesn't know about this yet. Thor. Love and Thunder is, underneath its very bright colours and its screaming goats, a film about what you do with love when the person you love is dying. Jane Foster knows she's dying. She chooses to pick up the hammer anyway, knowing what it costs. And Thor, who has watched so many people he loves die, his mother, his father, Loki twice, half of Asgard, everyone in the snap, is in the position of watching someone he loves choose a faster death for herself, and he cannot stop her, and he eventually stops trying to. There's a conversation between them, quiet and honest, where he asks her why she keeps transforming, even knowing the cost. She gives a version of the answer that amounts to, "I'd rather have less time as myself than more time as less than myself," which is a kind of bravery that doesn't look like bravery, that looks like stubbornness from the outside. She is making a choice about the quality of the time she has left, not just the quantity of it. Korg is also in this film, much more than in previous appearances, and gets a backstory that explains that his species reproduces by two males holding hands in a volcano, which is exactly the kind of detail Taika Waititi puts in films, and which you either find delightful or deeply baffling. I find it delightful. Korg is a person made of rocks who speaks very gently and is unaccountably good at emotional support, and his presence in the film provides a kind of steadiness that the more intense emotional beats need. The children fighting with Thor's lightning is the most joyful sequence in the film. For maybe 2 minutes, terror transforms into play. A dozen Asgardian children who are kidnapped and frightened are suddenly shooting lightning from their hands, and they are correctly having the time of their lives about it. And then the sequence ends, and they go back to needing to be rescued, and the battle continues. But for those 2 minutes, the film remembers what it is to be a child who is suddenly given something extraordinary and has not yet learned to be afraid of it. Scott Lang, 2 years after saving the universe with a time heist involving a quantum tunnel and very small trousers, has written a memoir. It's a bestseller. People recognize him on the street. They take photos with him. He is a local San Francisco hero, in the particular way that a city can take someone into its identity. And he is enjoying it with the uncomplicated pleasure of a man who spent 2 years in federal prison and has decided to find contentment wherever it's available. His daughter Cassie has grown up. Significantly, she's now a university student with a science background. Her mother's intelligence applied to the same quantum phenomena that shaped her father's entire career. And she's been arrested, once, twice, possibly more, for protests. Scott's response to this is a mixture of genuine pride and mild exasperation, which feels correct. Cassie has also, without telling anyone, built a device to send signals into the quantum realm. Scott finds out about this in the worst possible way, which is at the same moment that the device activates and pulls the entire family in. Scott, Hope, Hank Pym, Janet Van Dyne, Cassie, all of them dragged into the subatomic world simultaneously. The quantum realm, it turns out, is vast. Not just empty subatomic space, but an entire civilization. Multiple civilizations, actually, built across crystalline landscapes and quantum cities, populated by beings that evolved or were engineered to exist there. Janet has been here before, for 30 years, trapped after a mission went wrong. She's been keeping something from the family. Quite a lot, actually. The something is Kang. Kang the Conqueror was stranded in the quantum realm with his multiversal ship damaged. Janet met him. She began helping him repair his ship. She learned what he was, a being who travels the multiverse, conquering timelines, building empires across realities. She sabotaged the engine. She trapped him there. She got out eventually, and didn't tell anyone. He's still there. He's been there for decades. He's built himself a power base within the quantum realm, subjugating its populations, and he has been waiting patiently for the means to finish the repairs Janet prevented. The Ant-Man family is those means. Kang is not a cartoon villain. He's immoral, which is different. He doesn't see his conquest of civilizations as evil because he doesn't particularly frame things in moral terms. He's a builder of order. His order, certainly, through methods that are brutal, but from his perspective, the universes he conquers function better under his control. He holds Cassie hostage and tells Scott to enlarge a specific component of his ship, which will power the engine and let him escape. Scott does something clever instead of complying. He enlarges it wrong, destabilizes it rather than completing it, which gives the quantum realm's resistance a fighting chance. Darren Cross also reappears here. From the first Ant-Man film, the antagonist, who was shrunk and apparently destroyed. He wasn't. He ended up in the quantum realm, and Kang found him, reshaped him, transformed him into something called MODOK, a massive mechanized body built around a grotesquely enlarged head. His humanity is still in there, fractured, and in his final moments, it reasserts itself enough that he makes a choice against Kang. The film is generous enough to let him have that. Cassie rallies the quantum realm's population. The people who've been living under Kang's rule fight back. Hank Pym's army of ants, which have been evolving at an accelerated rate in the quantum environment, and have developed complex social structures and problem-solving abilities, join the battle. The whole realm erupts. The family defeats Kang. He appears to die. Scott holds the victory, and his daughter is alive, and he goes home. But before Kang dies, he says something that Scott can't stop thinking about. He warns him. He says, "You have no idea what you've done, what's coming, the things that are going to find you now." The post-credits scene makes clear what he meant. A vast amphitheatre, outside of time, filled with hundreds of Kang variants from across the multiverse. Different costumes, different eras, different temperaments, but all of them him. They're gathered to discuss the news that one of them has been killed, and that the heroes of his universe are starting to touch the multiverse. The death of one Kang has not solved anything. It has disturbed a council of Kangs, and they are now paying attention to this particular universe. One of them, Immortus, addresses the council. The multiverse is branching. The variants are multiplying. The time for subtlety is apparently ending. Scott goes home. He hugs his family. He cannot stop thinking about what Kang said. Something about the quantum realm sequence that I find genuinely interesting is how Cassie functions within it. She doesn't know these people. She arrived 5 minutes ago, and yet within a relatively short period, she's identified their political situation, understood the dynamics, and started making an argument that they should fight back. This is her father's instinct, Scott's ability to build alliances and find the angle, combined with something her father sometimes lacks, which is the willingness to make the political argument rather than just finding the clever technical solution. Hank Pym is in this film in a way that's worth appreciating. He's been in every Ant-Man film primarily as the grumpy genius who invents things and is exasperated by Scott. Here he has his own subplots with the ants, who have been evolving in the quantum realm at an accelerated rate and have developed social structures and problem-solving capacities that Hank, of all people, finds extraordinary. His expression when he realizes what his ants have become over the weeks he was separated from them is one of the more understated moments of genuine wonder in the film. MODOK, Darren Cross, reduced and enlarged and mechanized by Kang's engineering, is one of the more genuinely uncomfortable characters in this era. He was a villain in the first Ant-Man, motivated by jealousy and wounded pride, but he was a human being. What he is now is the result of someone else's punishment and creative cruelty. Kang didn't just imprison him, he transformed him into something grotesque and set him to work. The humanity that's still visible inside MODOK, the recognition in his eyes when he sees Scott, the flicker of something that resembles choice in his final moments, makes him pitiful rather than frightening, which is its own kind of horror. These two stories share something. They're both about people who were built or broken by someone who controlled them, and who have to choose who they want to be when that control is removed. The Loki who ran from the TVA's rules, the Rocket who escaped the man who made him. Two different kinds of survival, and two different kinds of ending. Starting with Loki, because his ending is one of the most affecting in Phase 4. After Sylvie kills he who remains, Loki is pulled back to the TVA headquarters, which is already beginning to change around him. Something worse happens almost immediately. He starts time-slipping, being pulled backward and forward through time involuntarily, sometimes to moments minutes ago, sometimes to moments years ahead, without control or warning. He's unstuck. The term used in the show is spaghettification, which is technically accurate and also quite funny. The TVA is in crisis. The temporal loom, the machine that processes all branching timelines and weaves them into the sacred timeline, is overwhelmed by the branches created when he who remains died. Too many timelines, too many threads. The loom can't handle the volume. If it fails, every timeline attached to it will be destroyed simultaneously. The team, Loki, Mobius, the TVA General Ouroboros, who is a wonderfully enthusiastic engineer, work on the problem. They also work on finding Sylvie, who has escaped into the timeline and is living quietly in a McDonald's in 1982, working the late shift, wanting nothing to do with time bureaucracies or multiversal politics. One can't entirely blame her. They find a He Who Remains variant, a man named Victor Timely, who is a mild-mannered inventor at the 1893 Chicago World's Fair, presenting rudimentary time technology to an impressed audience who has no idea he's a variant of the person who built the TVA. He's just a man with ideas that are more advanced than they should be, living in a world he finds interesting. This is quite a funny character to watch against the backdrop of everything else. The deeper problem becomes clear over the season. The temporal loom was built to handle one timeline. Even if they repair it, it can only sustain a limited number of branches. He Who Remains built it that way on purpose as a control mechanism, not a service infrastructure. The multiverse branching freely will always overwhelm it. There is no technical fix. Sylvie, who has her freedom now and is enjoying the very ordinary pleasures of a 1982 McDonald's at 1 in the morning, doesn't want to go back to fixing things. She spent her entire life being hunted by the TVA. She made her choice when she killed He Who Remains. She's done. Loki keeps time slipping. He begins to realize, through the slipping, that he can learn to control it. He practices. He slips back to a moment and tries a different thing, then back again, then again. He's learning to time travel through his own body's malfunction, which is not how physics is supposed to work, but works as a metaphor for someone who has been given exactly one impossible tool and is learning to use it properly. The loom fails. Everyone at the TVA, every timeline connected to it, every person Loki has come to know, Mobius, Ouroboros, Sylvie, B-15, all of it disappears. Loki watches it happen. He time slips before he disappears. He goes back. He tries. It fails again. He goes back. He tries differently. He practices this across what appears to be a very long subjective time, each attempt slightly different, each failure teaching him something. It is, structurally, Loki doing what Loki has always done, trying to cheat, trying to find the angle, except here there is no angle. There is only one solution, and it is not clever. The only permanent fix is to destroy the loom entirely and hold the branches himself. Not a machine. Loki, personally, existing at the end of time, anchoring every timeline with his own power, keeping them all alive. He Who Remains sat on a throne and pruned everything that branched. Loki sits on the same throne and holds everything open. He goes to the Citadel. He tears the loom apart with his magic. He takes every branching thread and holds them. In the final image of the show, Loki is alone at the center of time, in a golden version of the Ragnarok armor, branches of reality spreading from him in every direction, like the roots of a vast tree. Every story, every timeline, every life, he is holding all of them. He gave up everything for this. Mobius, Sylvie, the TVA, any version of a life outside this. He chose it, and the show is careful to show it as a choice. Not a martyrdom imposed on him, not a sacrifice extracted from him, but something he decided. The god of mischief became, in the end, the god of stories, and he holds every story together so that they can continue. That's the Season 2 ending. I don't know, it sat with me for a while. Meanwhile, in Guardians Volume 3, something happened that people didn't expect. The film made audiences cry about a raccoon. Systematically, with craft and patience, it established that everything you thought you knew about Rocket, the jokes, the guns, the aggressive deflection of any emotional conversation, was a response to specific, terrible things that happened to him. And it did this while also just telling a very good story. The Guardians are attacked on Nowhere by Adam Warlock, a golden-skinned, powerful being created by the Sovereign. Rocket is critically wounded in the attack, and the complication that emerges when they try to save him is this. Rocket was built by someone, specifically by the High Evolutionary, a geneticist of extraordinary capability and complete moral vacancy who experiments on animals to create enhanced beings. He put a kill switch in Rocket years ago. The kill switch is preventing his body from healing. To save him, they need the High Evolutionary's files. The film intercuts between the present, the Guardians breaking into the High Evolutionaries' facilities in increasingly desperate ways, and the past where we see Rocket's origin. He was the most exceptional of the High Evolutionaries' creations. Batch 89. Given enhanced intelligence, enhanced mechanical aptitude, a genius for engineering that the High Evolutionary had never managed to replicate in any previous subject. The High Evolutionary became obsessed with Rocket's brain, wanted to study it, wanted to harvest it. Rocket formed bonds in that facility. An otter named Lila, intelligent and gentle. A walrus named Teefs, quietly emotional. A rabbit named Floor. These four became each other's family, the only people who truly knew each other in a place built on exploitation and loneliness. They planned to escape together. The escape failed. The High Evolutionary killed Lila and had Teefs and Floor gunned down in front of Rocket as punishment for the attempt. Rocket attacked the High Evolutionary. He slashed his face. He ran. The scars on Rocket's face, the ones we've seen since the first Guardians film, without knowing what made them, are from that night. They are the physical mark of the moment his only friends died, and he survived. When Rocket is near death in the present timeline, he sees Lila in the space between. She tells him to go back, to live. He makes the choice to come back, rather than stay. The High Evolutionary is defeated. He is not killed. The Guardians have grown into people who choose differently. The people of Counter-Earth, his created civilization that he planned to destroy as a failed experiment, are killed when he destroys the planet. The kidnapped children his ship was carrying are freed. Nebula and Drax choose to stay on nowhere to race them, which is the most unexpected character turn, and somehow the most natural one. The Guardians disband properly, not dramatically, just finished. Peter Quill goes to Earth to find his grandfather. Rocket becomes the captain of a new team. Gamora returns to the Ravagers, and there's a moment with the new team preparing to fly where Dog Days Are Over plays, and Rocket grins, and it is completely earned. The team scattered, the family remains. One thing about Guardians Vol. 3 that doesn't get enough attention, the film uses the flashback structure with real patience. It doesn't reveal everything about Rocket's past at once. It parcels the information out across the film's runtime, so that each new detail lands in the context of the present-day crisis. You see young Rocket forming bonds with Lila just as the adult Rocket is at his most closed-off and defended. The contrast does the work that a lot of films would try to do with dialogue. James Gunn has said that he always intended the third film to be fundamentally Rocket's story, that the first two were about Peter finding his father and his found family, and this one was about the person in the group who had the hardest time believing he deserved to belong anywhere. That reading holds up. Every character gets something in the film, but Rocket's arc is the spine. The Peter Quill ending also deserves a moment. He goes to Earth. He finds his grandfather. They sit together. The grandfather tells him stories about his own life, about the world before Peter was born, about a family Peter never knew. And Peter eats breakfast and talks about his new everyday life with this old man who has been wondering his whole life what happened to the little boy who disappeared. It is an extremely quiet ending for someone who spent 3 films being the most vocally nostalgic character in the franchise. He gets to go home. The Guardians gave him the capacity to do that, to care about where he came from, not just where he was going. Both of these films pair characters who shouldn't logically work together and then make them work through friction, warmth, and a kind of mutual recognition of what the other person needs. It's a useful trick, done well in both cases. The Marvels begins with a problem that is irritating before it is dangerous. Carol Danvers, Monique Rambeau, and Kamala Khan, Ms. Marvel, a young hero from Jersey City who can project hard light constructs through a bangle from her family's history, all have light-based powers. When they use those powers simultaneously, while in proximity to a phenomenon called an entangled light field, they swap positions. Use your power. Find yourself somewhere else, in the middle of a mission, or a mission briefing, or a fight. The swapping is involuntary and comically disruptive, and sorting it out requires the three of them to actually communicate and coordinate rather than operate independently, which, it becomes clear quickly, none of them were doing much of before. Carol has been operating as a cosmic protector for decades at this point, maintaining peace across the galaxy, responding to threats largely alone. She is extraordinarily capable and not particularly accustomed to accounting for other people in what she does. Monica grew up idolizing Carol and then spent years processing the more complicated feelings of someone who idolizes a person who was largely absent. The WandaVision experience changed Monica at a biological level. She can now perceive and move through electromagnetic frequencies, and she's still figuring out what that means. Kamala is a teenager from New Jersey who idolizes Captain Marvel, which is both endearing and slightly uncomfortable for Carol personally. The antagonist is Dar-Ben, a Kree warrior whose world is dying because Carol, years ago, dismantled the Kree Supreme Intelligence and sent the Kree-Skrull War spiraling even further out of control. The resolution benefited the Skrulls. The Kree planet suffered in the aftermath. Dar-Ben is trying to use wormholes to siphon resources from other worlds, atmosphere, water, sunlight, to save her dying civilization. She is the kind of villain whose cause is coherent. She's wrong in what she's doing. She's not wrong about the damage Carol caused. The three women have to figure out how to fight effectively while swapping bodies mid-combat, which requires something that superpowers usually don't: trust and communication under pressure. By the end, they're choreographing their powers together, using the swapping deliberately, turning the problem into a technique. The resolution costs Monica specifically. The wormhole Dar-Ben uses tears open the fabric between universes, and the only way to seal it from the inside is to go through it. Monica does this. She seals it from the other side and ends up somewhere else entirely, a different universe, her power and her determination intact, but separated from her own world. A mid-credits scene of her film is Monica waking up to an unfamiliar face. The face will be recognizable to comic book readers. The rest of us will meet them in time. Deadpool and Wolverine arrives with considerably more noise. Wade Wilson's universe is dying because its anchor being a person so central to the timeline's identity that their existence stabilizes reality around them, has died. The TVA informs him of this, cheerfully and bureaucratically, and tells him his universe will be pruned. Wade, whose response to any crisis is to reframe it as slightly less serious than it is, decides that what he needs is a Wolverine. A different one, from a different universe, who will anchor his timeline instead. He travels through several alternate realities, looking for a Logan. The Logan he finds is what the film calls the worst Wolverine, which is technically how this Logan describes himself. He is deeply depressed, drinking heavily, living in isolation in an area of unspecified wilderness. His story is this: in his universe, he was supposed to lead the X-Men. He failed them. Not through villainy, not through an external enemy, but through his own inability to be present and connected to the people who needed him. Every X-Man died, not because he wasn't powerful enough, but because he wasn't there in the ways that mattered. He carries this as a conviction about himself, that he is fundamentally the version of this person who fails people. Wade's proposal, "Please come be a hero in my universe, it's dying," is not received enthusiastically. But Wade's relentlessness is a form of care that eventually gets through Logan's defenses, because it doesn't ask him to be better than he is, it just asks him to come. They end up in the void, which is where the TVA sends everything it prunes, a desolate expanse at the end of time, full of discarded variants and broken realities, ruled by Cassandra Nova, Charles Xavier's twin, who survived being killed in the womb, and has been here for decades, building a power base out of the abandoned. The residents of the Void include Gambit, Blade, Elektra, and Laura, the young female Wolverine clone. None of them chose to be here. The film is extremely funny throughout this. Wade breaks the fourth wall continuously, commenting on the MCU, on narrative convention, on the absurdity of his own situation, on Wolverine's emotional unavailability. Logan is furious about almost everything, and occasionally touched by something, and refuses to admit it. Their dynamic is genuinely warm underneath all the violence and profanity. The resolution involves both of them running their healing factors through a device simultaneously in a way that should kill them both. It doesn't, because healing factors are what they are. Cassandra Nova is defeated, the Void is sealed, Wade's universe is saved. Logan, whose own universe is gone, and who has no home to return to, accepts Wade's offer of a new one. The ending shows them in a sort of found family arrangement. Wade and Vanessa, Blind Owl, Logan. And Logan has something he didn't have before, which is a reason to stay in one place. People who know him as the person he is, not the person he failed to be. The film is also, underneath everything else, about the particular loneliness of being a person with a healing factor. Everyone you love dies and you wake up again, outliving your purpose. The film takes that seriously, while also being absolutely chaotic about everything else, which is the specific balance it was always trying to strike. The Marvels has a running joke about Kamala's family that is actually doing something structurally important. Her family, enthusiastic, intrusive, deeply loving, slightly overwhelming, represents a kind of ordinary warmth that the MCU doesn't often let its heroes have. Carol Danvers has been operating alone across the galaxy for decades. Monica grew up with a hero mother and then lost her, and spent years grieving in ways that complicated her relationship to heroism itself. Kamala just has parents who are excited about everything, and when her family ends up involved in the climactic events of the film, their sheer ordinary enthusiasm is played not as comedy relief, but as a genuine resource, love as a practical tool. It's slightly ridiculous and entirely effective. The Flurkin deserve a brief mention too. A Flurkin looks like a cat. It is not a cat. It has spatial dimensions inside it that do not correspond to its exterior, which means it can swallow entire ships into its mouth and deposit them somewhere else entirely. In the Marvels, an entire squadron of Flurkins is deployed as a tactical resource in a way that is objectively absurd and extremely well executed. The MCU has a good relationship with absurdity when it decides to commit to it. Deadpool and Wolverine has an interesting relationship to MCU history more broadly. It's the first Fox Marvel character integration into the main MCU, and it handles the question of continuity with its own meta-awareness. Wade acknowledges that his universe was separate, that these are different stories, that the merger is happening. The film is aware of the franchise politics it represents, and it uses that awareness as material rather than trying to hide the seams. The Laura appearance in The Void is worth its own moment. She's a young female Wolverine clone from a different universe, left in the Void by the TVA's pruning. Her relationship to Logan in that space, she recognizes what he is. She is what he is, and she is also irreversibly someone else, is left appropriately unresolved. She does follow them out. Her story continues in the Void, or wherever the Void's residents end up. The film acknowledges her without trying to contain her. 5 years after Endgame, the world is still sorting out who the heroes are supposed to be, and who gets to decide. Captain America, Brave New World, and Thunderbolts are both, in their different ways, about that question. About the gap between the official version of something and the truth underneath it. Sam Wilson is 6 months after being handed the mantle of Captain America. There's a new president, Thaddeus Ross, General Ross, the man who spent most of the MCU trying to destroy or control the Hulk, the man who built the Sokovia Accords that fractured the Avengers, the man who kept Steve Rogers' friends in an underwater prison. He is now the President of the United States, which is either deeply uncomfortable or just realistic, depending on your feelings about political institutions. Ross has called Sam in on a diplomatic mission, on what geologists are calling Celestial Island, the landmass created when Tiamat's hand emerged from the Indian Ocean during the Eternals crisis. There are deposits of a material called adamantium, effectively indestructible, the hardest substance yet discovered. Multiple nations want access to it. Ross is trying to broker an international treaty. At a White House summit, something goes wrong. A song plays Mr. Blue by the Fleetwoods, which is a genuine 1959 pop song and an odd choice for a trigger, and several of the attendees pull weapons and open fire on the president. The attack is coordinated, precise, and deeply confusing because the men who do it have no apparent motive. The investigation leads to Samuel Stearns, who MCU veterans will recognize as the leader, a man whose exposure to Bruce Banner's gamma-irradiated blood years ago in The Incredible Hulk expanded his brain to extraordinary size and intelligence. He's been in custody for 16 years, waiting. He used the summit as a demonstration of what he can do, using the song as a psychic trigger for mind-controlled attackers. The classified adamantium samples that Sam and Joaquin Torres recovered at the start of the film were part of the misdirection. The other complication is Ross himself. Thaddeus Ross has, in his past, been exposed to his own Hulk blood treatments. Under extreme psychological stress, he transforms into a Red Hulk, a Hulk-scale form with the same tremendous power, but with a different hormonal signature, different coloration, and crucially, a different relationship between the human mind and the beast. Red Hulk retains more of Ross's personality than the Hulk typically retains Bruce's, which makes him more dangerous in some situations and possibly more reachable in others. Sam fights the Red Hulk through Washington, which is a spectacular, if deeply inconvenient, sequence, and ultimately gets through to the man inside the monster through a combination of physical persistence and the specific skill that defines Sam Wilson as Captain America. He talks to people. He finds the human inside the impossible situation, and he speaks to it directly. Ross comes back to himself. The aftermath is honest, which is more than you always get from political stories. Ross, recognizing the extent to which his own ambition and compromises enabled Stern's scheme, resigns. He accepts imprisonment. Isaiah Bradley, remember the hidden history of Captain America, from the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, is exonerated and acknowledged publicly. Joaquin Torres becomes a full Avenger, and Stearns, in his cell at the raft, tells Sam that something is coming from other worlds. A warning, not a threat. He says it the way someone says it, who genuinely wants to be believed. Now let's talk about the Thunderbolts, which is the more surprising of the two films. Valentina Ahlegrudu-Fontaine has been collecting people. She's a CIA director of considerable power and murky ethics, and across several films, hiring Yelena Belova after Natasha's death, approaching John Walker after his shield was taken, she has been quietly assembling a roster of damaged operatives. Former Black Widow, failed Captain America, Soviet super soldier, Ghost, who phases through matter, Taskmaster, who can replicate any physical action she sees, and now Bucky Barnes, who came in through a different door. The inciting incident is Yelena in Malaysia destroying evidence of something called the Sentry Program. The Sentry Program produced Bob Reynolds, a man with profound psychological wounds, childhood trauma from an abusive father, deep and abiding conviction that he is fundamentally not enough, who volunteered for a superhuman enhancement procedure, hoping that power might fix what was wrong with him. It gave him what he was promised. He is extraordinarily powerful. He can fly. He is nearly indestructible. He can level city blocks. The power is real. The psychological wounds are, if anything, larger now. amplified rather than addressed by the enhancement. Valentina has been cultivating Bob as a political instrument. She positioned herself as his mentor and protector, exploiting his need for approval and attachment with the precise knowledge of someone who has read his full psychological profile. She planned to present him to the public as a government-sanctioned superhero, the Watchtower's champion, powerful enough to make her untouchable politically. Bob's alter ego is called the Void. It's his self-hatred given physical form, a supernatural darkness that expands from him when he's overwhelmed, consuming light and creating pocket dimensions full of people's worst fears. When the plan breaks down and Bob's psychological state deteriorates, the Void begins engulfing New York City. Real darkness, expanding, swallowing, real. The 6 broken operatives who ended up together, Yelena, Bucky, Alexei, Ghost, Taskmaster, John Walker, became the Thunderbolts by accident. Alexei named them on impulse, reminded by a memory of Yelena's childhood. They are not a team in any conventional sense. They are people who didn't leave. Yelena goes into the Void alone to find Bob. She walks through the darkness, through hallucinations of the people she killed, through the weight of her own history, and she finds him in a recreation of his childhood bedroom, his mind hiding in the place. It learned to hide when things were too much. She hugs him. She tells him that he is not alone, that the team is there, that he matters to people. The others find their way through the darkness and join her. Group hug. New York City saved. That's the actual beat. The most powerful being introduced in Phase 5 is defeated by a group hug, and the film earns it completely because it has done the work of establishing what that group hug means. That Bob spent his entire life believing he was unlovable, and these people who are themselves broken and damaged are choosing to love him anyway. Valentina spins the story. She names them the New Avengers in a government ceremony. The asterisk in the title, Thunderbolts, is the footnote, the hidden truth, the caveat in the official narrative. The team is branded. They have a name they didn't choose. But what they have that can't be branded is each other. And in the film's final moments at the newly named Watchtower, the New Avengers are seen watching a mysterious Fantastic Four spacecraft approach, a metal mask held in a gloved hand. Dr. Doom, looking at Franklin Richards, the son of Reed and Sue Richards, a boy of apparently unlimited cosmic power. His arrival is quiet. It is the kind of quiet that precedes something large. Valentina Ale Grutu Fontaine has been threading through this era of the MCU since Black Widow, and the Thunderbolts finally allows her to be fully examined rather than implied. She is extraordinarily competent at reading people. Her psychological profiles of her operatives are apparently highly accurate. She understood Bob Reynolds' vulnerabilities well enough to exploit them systematically. She understood John Walker well enough to catch him at his most disgraced and offer him exactly what he needed to hear. She has been playing a long game. What makes her interesting rather than simply villainous is that she believes she's right. She genuinely thinks that the vacuum left by the Avengers disbanding required someone to fill it with a managed, accountable structure, and that her approach, identifying powerful people and attaching them to a government framework before they can become uncontrollable, is more responsible than the previous ad hoc arrangement. She's not entirely wrong about the problem. She's wrong about herself being the right person to solve it, and wrong about the methods, but the diagnosis has merit. The asterisk in the title, Thunderbolts, is doing quite a lot of work. The asterisk appears in superhero comic notation to indicate not actually what it says. See footnote for context. The team is officially the New Avengers. The asterisk is the show's way of saying, here is the official story. Here is the truth underneath. Every powerful institution offers a public-facing version and an actual version, and these people are the actual version. Captain America, Brave New World, quietly does something with Ruth Bat-Seraph that I think rewards attention. She's a former Black Widow operative serving as the president's head of security, which means she is one of the women Natasha freed from the Red Room's control in Black Widow, now building a life in a different kind of service. The show doesn't make a big deal of this. It just places her there, doing her job extremely well, her history present in the text for people who noticed it. This film doesn't take place in the main MCU universe. That's important context. It's set on Earth 828, a different reality in 1964, and it looks like nothing else in the franchise. Bright primary colours, optimistic retrofuturism, the kind of visual design that suggests a world where the future was still a hopeful project rather than an anxiety. Silver cars and round edges, and a city that has made room for people who can stretch into buildings or burst into flame. The Fantastic Four have been publicly known and celebrated for 4 years on this Earth. Reed Richards is a genius scientist who can stretch his body to impossible dimensions. Sue Storm, his wife, can generate force fields and turn invisible. Ben Grimm is made of orange rock and is extraordinarily strong and extraordinarily lonely about it, because he looks like a monster and he is not one. Johnny Storm, Sue's brother, can fly and generate fire and is considerably more at ease with the celebrity aspect of all this than the others. The film opens with Sue announcing to Reed that she's pregnant. This is news that the film holds carefully. The joy of it and the weight of what it means to bring a child into a life as dangerous and strange as theirs. They have no idea, as they stand there with that news, how significant the child will turn out to be. The Silver Surfer arrives that afternoon. He is a being of extraordinary power, silver, silent, descending from orbit with a message. Galactus is coming. Galactus, an entity of incomprehensible scale that moves between worlds and consumes them to sustain itself. Not evil, not cruel, not conscious of morality in any recognizable sense, simply a force of nature that eats planets. Galactus found Earth and sent the Silver Surfer ahead to announce it, which is, as gestures go, technically polite and practically devastating. The Fantastic Four go to Galactus's ship to negotiate. This is both brave and somewhat optimistic. You can't negotiate with weather, and Galactus is weather at cosmic scale. The conversation doesn't go anywhere useful. The film resolves the Galactus problem through a combination of cleverness and brute power. Reed and Sue and Ben and Johnny can defeat something that size. Or something that size. What they can do is be clever and be willing and hold things together long enough for something else to happen. That something else involves the Silver Surfer, who has his own relationship to what Galactus does to worlds, and Franklin Richards, who is born during the crisis, and whose first act is apparently to save his mother's life through power that nobody yet understands. Franklin Richards, a child of 2 enhanced humans, born at the moment a world-ending cosmic entity, is trying to consume his planet, demonstrating the ability to reshape reality at birth. The MCU is planting something here that will take years to pay off, and the film knows it, and is comfortable with that ambiguity. He is small, and new, and impossible, and his parents look at him the way parents look at children who have already done something that changes everything. The ending places them in the MCU's present through implication. This team is displaced from a universe with different rules, and the way they'll connect to the main timeline is presumably through the multiverse machinery that's been building for years. When Doctor Doom appears in the final scene, standing in their space with his green cloak and his metal mask, looking at Franklin with the particular attention of someone who has already decided this child matters. The film is setting up the next chapter, not resolving this one. Doctor Doom as a character has a history in Marvel Comics that is worth knowing briefly. He is the ruler of a small nation called Latveria. He is arguably the most intelligent man in his universe. He is a scientist and a sorcerer simultaneously. He wears armor and a mask to conceal scars from an explosion, though the comics and the films handle the extent of the scarring differently. He is almost never simply a villain. He is a man of genuine conviction, who believes that if he were in charge of things, they would be better, and who is correct often enough that the argument has some merit, even when the methods are indefensible. His appearance at the end of the Fantastic Four film, interacting with Franklin Richards, a child who can unmake and remake reality, suggests that Phase 6 will involve these forces in interesting and probably very large ways. There's something pleasant about where the MCU currently is. After years of the Infinity Saga moving toward Endgame, after the grief and disorientation of Phase 4, Phase 5 has been building towards something new rather than wrapping something up. The pieces are on the board. A multiverse that's still unstable. A council of Kangs, they a child, with vast cosmic power, with unlimited power. A team of broken operatives who became something without intending to. A new Captain America who is actively arguing about what the symbol means. The Fantastic Four are coming in from the side, from a different universe, bringing their 1964 optimism into a present that has become considerably more complicated. That contrast might be exactly what the MCU needs. The Fantastic Four's relationship with celebrity is worth thinking about for a moment, because it's very different from how the MCU usually handles superheroes. In the main timeline, being a superhero is complicated by politics and public suspicion, and legal frameworks, and varying degrees of institutional support. The Fantastic Four, on Earth 828, are celebrated. They've been doing this for 4 years, and the world loves them. They've had time to establish what they are and what they stand for, without the constant argument about whether they should exist. That confidence shapes how they engage with Galactus. They don't assume they'll win, but they assume they should try. Reed's first instinct is to negotiate. Sue's first instinct is to find the point of leverage. Johnny's first instinct is to fly at it very fast. Ben's first instinct is to punch. This is a team that has been working together long enough to know each other's rhythms, and the film gets considerable pleasure out of showing that in action. Reed Richards, as a character, is the MCU's most generous treatment of him yet. He's warm, he's earnest, he's slightly absent-minded, he loves his wife, and is clearly slightly terrified about becoming a parent. He is also wrong about the Galactus situation for most of the film, which the film allows without diminishing him. Smart people get things wrong. The willingness to revise in the face of evidence is also a form of intelligence. The Silver Surfer's role in the resolution is one I'll describe lightly for people who haven't seen it, because it's genuinely good and worth discovering. He is not simply Galactus's herald. He is someone who made a bargain once to protect something he loved, and the film takes that backstory seriously, without making it the primary emotional focus. He exists in a moral state that is neither villainous nor heroic. He serves a function, and whether that function is good or bad depends on which planet is being consumed. If there's an emotional argument running through all of Phase 4 and Phase 5, it's about what you do with a version of yourself that you didn't choose. The multiverse, as a narrative device, keeps creating situations where characters have to face who they could have been, or who they were, or who they're afraid of becoming. Wanda's children exist in another universe where a version of her is raising them. The Scarlet Witch tore apart realities to reach them, and what she found was that those children were frightened by what she'd become. The version of herself that existed in that universe, less powerful, more ordinary, intact, had something Wanda lost and couldn't recover by force. Peter Parker met 2 older versions of himself. One had settled into his purpose. One was still carrying a guilt he'd never put down. Neither of them was Peter's Peter. They were different histories, different scars, different versions of the same starting point, and they helped each other. The one who needed redemption got it. The one who needed to know that the wait was survivable was shown that it was. Sylvie and Loki are the same person, essentially, separated by circumstance and decades of different experiences. They developed feelings for each other, which is philosophically peculiar, But the underlying story is about recognizing yourself in someone who made different choices and neither condemning nor forgiving, just understanding. The worst Wolverine is every version of a person who believes their failures define them permanently, who has decided the evidence is conclusive. Wade Wilson is the argument that the evidence isn't conclusive, that you keep going not because you're certain, but because the alternative is to stop. And stopping is a choice with consequences. The multiverse, in other words, keeps being used as a mirror, not primarily a plot device about parallel universes, though it is that, but as a way of getting characters to confront the question of whether who they are is who they have to be. And most of the answers, when they come, are gentle. You can choose. It costs something, but you can. The Kang problem is the structural threat that runs underneath all of this. He who remains maintained order by controlling the timeline. Sylvie killed him with completely understandable and not entirely unjustified motives. The result is a multiverse that is free and branching and filled with versions of a multiversal conqueror who are no longer being pruned. The Council of Kangs at the end of Quantumania is the consequence of that freedom. Hundreds of powerful variants, now aware of each other and aware that something in the main timeline is disrupting their plans. The MCU has not resolved this. It is quite deliberately unresolved. The heroes defeated one Kang. The problem is not one Kang. The problem is that he who remains was, in his strange and controlling way, actually correct. Without the sacred timeline, someone worse rises, perhaps many someones. What's interesting is who is building the response, not a new team of classic heroes. The new architecture is scattered. Sam Wilson as Captain America, a first-generation hero with a shield and wings and no super serum. The Thunderbolts, a group of damaged operatives who found each other by accident. America Chavez, learning to control power she's always been afraid of. Kamala Khan bringing energy and sincerity to situations that usual Cassie Lang, a superhero's daughter who rallied a revolution in a quantum civilization. Quantum civilization. Joaquin Torres, learning what it means to be the Falcon when the Falcon became something else. These are not the Avengers. They don't have Tony Stark's resources, or Steve Rogers' certainty, or Thor's millennia of experience. They have, collectively, a considerable amount of trauma and a surprising amount of warmth toward each other. And they keep showing up in the right places at the right times. And then there's the question of legacy. Tony's absence is present in almost every story in this era. His technology shapes the world. His sacrifice set the terms of the current peace. Peter Parker, who spent so long trying to figure out how to be a hero in Tony's shadow, is now operating entirely outside that shadow, alone, in a homemade suit without anyone who knows his name. That is the most Tony-influenced choice he could possibly make. Tony made himself Iron Man out of almost nothing in a cave in Afghanistan. Peter has made himself Spider-Man out of almost nothing in a New York apartment. And the parallel is not accidental. Natasha's legacy lives in Yelena, who is angrier and funnier and less mythologized, and who is building something in the Thunderbolts that Natasha never had. A team of people who know her actual self rather than her cover story. Wanda's story is still in progress if she survived. The Darkhold is destroyed, the grief is real, the power is still there somewhere, and Loki is at the end of time, holding everything together, alone, having become something that required him to give up being anything else. There is a particular kind of heroism in that, the kind that nobody sees, that doesn't require recognition. That is chosen because it is necessary and not because it is rewarded. The god of mischief arrived at the Loki. The god of mischief became the god of stories at the end of Loki Season 2, the god of stability, and he did it by choice. The Fantastic Four bring something different to this in their arrival. Not grief, not reckoning, not the weight of Phase 4's losses. They bring a 1964 version of what a hero is supposed to be: confident, curious, family-oriented, willing to fly toward Galactus and try talking to it. They are the old ideal arriving in a more complicated present, and how they'll navigate that is one of the more interesting questions. Doctor Doom's appearance at the very start of Phase 6 is a statement about direction and meant about direction. Doom is not a straightforward villain. He is an argument. He would say, and would not be entirely wrong, that the chaos of the last several years, the fractured Avengers, the blip, the multiverse instability, the power vacuums, happened because the heroes were insufficiently organized, insufficiently governed, insufficiently led. He believes in order. He believes in control. He believes, above all, in himself. And he is looking at a child who could reshape reality as a resource or a responsibility, and that distinction will define everything that comes next. There's something the post-Endgame MCU does with women characters that the Infinity Saga didn't fully commit to. Wanda, Monica, Carol, Kamala, Yelena, America, Jane Foster, Cassie Lang. These are the people doing the most interesting work in this era. Not because the male characters disappear, but because the women are given the more complex psychological arcs. Wanda's grief and corruption is the most examined villain motivation in the franchise. Yelena's process of figuring out who she is outside of the Red Room is more gradual and honest than Natasha's equivalent story was allowed to be. America's relationship to her own power, fear that became strength, is the emotional spine of Multiverse of Madness, even though Strange is nominally the protagonist. The MCU is slower to commit to this in how it markets and titles things. These aren't all solo films with their names on the poster, but in terms of what the actual narrative weight is distributed across, the women are carrying more of it than perhaps advertised. There's also a thread running through the era about fathers, Wenwu losing his wife and weaponizing his love of his children, the high evolutionary who believed he owned the things he created, Kang, who treats civilizations as property rather than life, Gore, whose grief became hatred because the father figure he'd prayed to failed him, and Thor, at the end of Love and Thunder, choosing to raise love, choosing fatherhood not as ownership or legacy, but as presence and care. The era is full of bad fathers and one genuinely good one, and the good one got there by watching all the others. The blip, as a premise, was bold. 5 years of absence and return created a world where grief is simultaneously personal and universal, where everybody has a version of the same wound, where everyone knows what it is to lose something that returned and found it wasn't quite the same as what had left. The MCU has used that backdrop with varying levels of consistency, but at its best, in WandaVision, in The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, in the quiet moments of No Way Home, it has produced stories about what it actually costs to survive, which is a kind of story that superhero films don't often tell. They tell about the cost of sacrifice, about the price of power, about what it means to put yourself between other people, and danger. The post-Endgame MCU has added another register to that. What it costs to keep living, to keep choosing, to keep showing up for people who don't always know you're there. And that's the shape of it, more or less. From Westview to the quantum realm, from the end of time to the surface of a planet, being consumed by something incomprehensibly vast, from a woman building a sitcom out of grief to a god sitting alone at the center of every story ever told, holding them open so they can keep going. It's a lot of story, and I'm aware we've covered a lot of ground tonight at a fairly leisurely pace, which was the idea. None of it needed to be rushed. The Marvel Universe is good at the grand gesture, the enormous battle, the moment where everything is at stake. What it's better at, when it's at its best, is the moment before and the moment after. The quiet scene in the middle of chaos where someone says something true. There are images from this era that I find myself returning to when I think about what the post-Endgame MCU actually is. Loki at the end of time, golden armoured, alone, holding every branching story together with his hands. Not because anyone asked him to, not because it's glorious, because it needed to be done, and he was the one who could. Sam Wilson making a speech about who America is and isn't, in a new suit, with the shield, refusing to pretend the history isn't what it is, and flying anyway. There's something in that combination that the MCU has been building towards since the beginning, and rarely said so clearly. Peter Parker walking away from MJ in a coffee shop, because protecting people sometimes means they never know you're there. That's the oldest Spider-Man lesson, finally allowed to exist without softening. Rocket choosing to come back rather than stay with his dead friends. Not because life is obviously better, just because it's the choice he made. There's more coming, of course. Their doom arrived quietly, and that was not a quiet arrival. And not a quiet arrival. The Kangs are watching, Monica is in another universe, Franklin Richards exists, the multiverse is still not stable, and nobody has a complete plan for what to do about that. But tonight doesn't need to end with stakes. Tonight can end with the smaller things. With the fact that these stories, across all their scale and chaos, keep coming back to the same questions. What do you do with the grief that doesn't resolve? How do you carry a legacy that doesn't quite fit? What does it cost to be the person who holds things together when nobody is watching? Whether the broken people can find each other and become something. They usually can. The MCU is, underneath everything, fairly optimistic about that. So wherever you are in your evening, if you're still following along, good. If you drifted off somewhere around the quantum realm, that's exactly what this was for. The stories are here. They'll be here whenever you come back. There's one more thing worth saying before we properly wind down. The MCU is a franchise, which means it is partly a commercial enterprise. Films and shows made to generate revenue, with sequels and merchandise and parks and all of that. That's true. It's also true that the best of what this era produced was made by people who genuinely cared about the stories they were telling, who thought seriously about grief and legacy and identity and the price of power, and who managed to explore those themes inside a framework involving a man who can talk to ants and a god who is also a raccoon. The combination is genuinely unusual. There is no other story format that can do exactly what this one does. Move between the intimate and the cosmic, between the funny and the devastating, between a specific character moment and a universe-scale threat, all within the same continuity. At its best, that's what the MCU has always been. And the post-Endgame era, for all its messiness and its occasional